Welcome back to the podcast. Gabe Yanez and I, we are joined by Amit Elor. Now, if you have never heard of Amit, you have to go look her background up. She is a total badass 2024 Olympic gold medalist in Paris. Man, I watched that video of your final fight. I watched multiple of them going up to it. But man, just pure dominance. But Amit, you've been in the wrestling space forever. And we're just excited to dive into mindset, training, what you have going on right now. So welcome to the show and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. I think a good place to start is tell us a little bit more about how you got into wrestling. I know you have quite a few siblings, and if I'm not mistaken, your dad was into athletics as well. But the fact that you've been to a local wrestling spot, I've taken my son multiple times to the Los Gatos Wrestling Club, and I love the energy. I love everything about wrestling. I think wrestling is incredible. How'd you get into it?
Yeah, me too. I'm the youngest of 6 kids. The first person to start wrestling in my family was my older brother, and I was 4 years old at the time. I would go with my mom to his practices. I watched quite a few of his practices, and compared to anything I've seen at the young age of 4, wrestling looked like the funnest thing I've ever seen. So for a while, I begged my mom. I was like, "Oh, can I please go on the mats?" She would just have to hold me down just so I wouldn't run on the mats when all the kids were practicing. And eventually, I think you had to be 5 years old to join, but it was very convincing. So I was able to start wrestling at 4. Worked it was at a kids club. I went to a lot of kids practices, and the rest is history.
Man, I just from a youth perspective. So my son, he's about to be 11, but I was taking him to the wrestling. So I have a background in Jiu Jitsu and CrossFit stuff, but I was at the wrestling club, and you're seeing these kids from, I don't know, 7 to high school kids. They blend both of them here, right? In general, they separate them out, but it's in the same area. And I don't know if you remember this from being in Los Gatos because you lived locally to us for a long time, but there is this sign on the roof and it just says, "If you're looking at this, you're getting pinned." Do you remember? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I don't remember that, but that's hilarious. Oh, I love that.
It's just so good because they have all this motivational stuff all over the walls and ropes, and then there's just this one right on the ceiling, and I just imagine some guy getting feeling about looking up and just. Anyways, the hard work, the effort, the diligence that goes into wrestling, I think that wrestlers are just built different, and especially coming from a young age. I'm curious, as you evolved and you've won a lot, what was it like, I guess, kind of coming up as a female also wrestler? How did you find other competitors and how did that evolution occur? Because it's predominantly a male sport. Would you agree? I don't know if you'd agree with that, but it's more males seem to do it than women.
Yeah, no, it was always a challenge to find places to practice, training partners, competitions. Up until freshman year of high school, the majority of my competitions were all against boys, but it was something I just got used to. For the most part, I was the only girl in the room, and at first it was a little weird, but it became normal, and I think it motivated me to always train harder, prove that I was, worth being in the room just with the boys and the coaches and everything. My mom was always extremely supportive. She would drive me sometimes 8 hours over to Southern California or Las Vegas just to compete in a kids competition. And, for the trouble of it too, she would be like, "Okay, Amit, let's do 2 different weight classes and 2 different age divisions. Just get as many matches as they possibly can let you do." So that was kind of our mentality growing up, just, make the most out of every opportunity, every practice. And I think it worked out, just one competition after another, and there just happened to be more and more opportunities coming up.
Amit, I'm really curious your take, because one thing that we talk a lot about on the podcast with parents is youth sports. And I think you have a very interesting take because you're so close to it. You're obviously super young, 20 years old. So you're the closest for any guest that we've had in actually being the athlete in youth sports. One thing that we talk a lot about is this: do you have to pick one thing and one thing only and dedicate yourself to that to be great? Or is it trying all these different things, being athletic? In your experience, did you ever have interest in doing something else? Did you ever feel even any inkling of burnout from just doing wrestling and that being your thing? Like even now when you mentioned like going to these competitions, a lot of travel, like, doing different weight classes and all that, was that ever something that you kind of experienced? And then I'm curious, based off of that, your overall maybe just take on, going all in on this one thing, or especially in your youth, like trying a little bit of everything?
Oh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, growing up, I actually did all sorts of different sports, and wrestling just happened to be one of them. And I just loved it. I loved getting to try new things and experience a whole bunch of different sports. Basically, a lot of my schedule throughout elementary school was I would go to school, finish around 2:45 around there. And my mom would drop me off at this community youth center that had a whole bunch of different sports, everything from judo, wrestling, taekwondo, gymnastics, rhythmic gymnastics, boxing. And I would just do one class after another until around 9 p.m. at night. And I'd do my homework in between classes, and that was just pretty much my day. I didn't dive deep into a lot of the sports unless I was really interested in them. For an example, I was very competitive in judo from ages 7 to 10. And I actually dreamt of going to the Olympics in judo around that time. I didn't even think about it for wrestling. So I think I just had a lot of flexibility to, pursue whatever my heart wanted, put as much effort and interest into any of the sports that were exciting that I fell in love with. And it just, at the end of the day, it happened to be wrestling. But I think I'm really lucky that I was able to do all sorts of different sports because I think it made me more of a well-rounded athlete and also helped prevent burnout. Growing up, some of my teammates also were extremely talented and incredible, but over the years, I slowly saw them, getting burnt out or drifting away from the sport. Sometimes their parents, too, were very strict or pushy with them about what they could and couldn't do within the sport. But surprisingly, my mom, no matter how much she sacrificed for me, she always told me, Amit, if you want to quit right now at this moment, that's okay. It'll be okay. Which is, surprising when you put so much effort, but it always made me feel like I was in control of my decisions and I was truly doing the sport because I loved it and because I wanted to.
Man, that's a really interesting nugget you just said. I just want to make sure I put a pin for myself, right? Is that your mom in particular kind of put the power in your hands and said, hey, if you ever want to quit, that's fine. And that's really interesting to me because I'm thinking about, hey, how does that relate from my kids and I? How can I put them and make them feel the same way where I'm not encouraging them to quit, of course, but I'm putting the ball in their court. It's their decision so they can take ownership on it. How do you think, listening to you talk, right? You get out of school and then you're at this location that has multi-sport faceted. You're doing judo, which, dude, judo is badass too. I mean, incredible. I love the throws. Anyways. So now you're training, but you're training for all these hours. Do you think that was a nurture or a nature thing? Do you think that you were born with this innate desire to essentially train hard? Or do you think that was something that your parents instilled in you and or all your siblings to get you to that point?
I think it was a combination of nature and nurture. I think I had some natural athleticism. I had a lot of energy. I was always trying to be the best at whatever I decided to pursue. And I think part of that was nurture, kind of a mentality that I felt within my family, always aiming to get the best grades. And naturally, I was just very competitive. I remember we would run circles during warm-ups in wrestling, and I would always try to run the fastest, and I would always try to run the biggest possible circle. So I didn't want to run towards the inside because that meant that my laps were shorter. So every little thing I made a competition, which I think in some ways, it caused me to always work extremely hard, push myself harder. And then, part of it too, as I got older was, competition within myself, not necessarily against other people, but just knowing what I'm capable of and holding myself accountable, to everything in life, pretty much.
One thing that I was reading as we were kind of prepping for this is that you haven't lost a match in 5 years. Is that correct? Does that, I don't know. I think there's kind of two sides to that maybe. Is there a pressure that adds up with that of almost having to keep that streak, or I'm sure that there's always a bullseye on your back because if you haven't lost in 5 years, everyone kind of wants to take the top competitor, or is it more on the flip side? Just, one thing Jason talks a lot about actually is earned confidence. How much confidence do you go into in all these matches because you've proven over 5 years that like, you're putting the hard work in, and there's a reason you haven't lost in 5 years. I don't know. What kind of, where do you fall on both of those sides, or is it a little bit of both?
I think for me personally, those 5 years just passed by. They flew by. It feels like just yesterday that I took that international loss. I think it was like 2019 or something. But pretty much every match I approach, I know that there's always a chance of losing, and that you can never underestimate anybody. So I kind of approach it one match at a time. And then when it really comes down to competition, most of the time, me personally, I feel like I'm always struggling to have enough confidence. But when it comes to competition day, I push all of that false confidence into me, and I feel different. I feel the adrenaline and the performance of it, and the competition itself. It just like pushes me into performance mode. I have those blinders on, and I'm just so focused on the match ahead of me. And I think that is honestly what makes me a pretty strong competitor, is just that mental strength and just being able to control my mindset and my emotions before my match, so I can really just go out there and perform. So I think in that sense, you could think of it as like a target on my back. But when it comes down to actual competition, I'm not thinking about any of that. I'm just simply thinking about wrestling, and I'm thinking about the 6 minutes, the opponent I have, what my attacks, everything pretty much like that.
Because you started wrestling so young, and because mindset is such an important part of wrestling, have you had like a mindset coach? I know that you've had to overcome adversity in a variety of different areas, right? In personal life, and obviously, for lack of a better term, professionally, I guess, with wrestling. I mean, definitely professionally. What am I talking about? So professionally and personally. And I'm wondering, like, did you have a mindset coach? Have you had someone who's worked with you to help compartmentalize, to utilize specific skills? And if so, what are they, and how do we steal them from you?
So I've
learn them from you is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, of course. I've actually never had a mindset coach or a sports psychologist. I think a lot of it has been trial and error and knowledge gained through experience. I remember my very first world championship was it was U17. I think one of the main international losses I took, I ended up taking bronze. And I remember when I made that team, in order to make a world team, you have to win nationals. So I remember once I got that spot on the team, for, 3 months straight, I was having trouble sleeping at night. I was having dreams where I was competing. I was just stressing about it constantly. And when it came down to competition, I was still able to perform, try my best, but I really let the stress of it and the expectations get to me. I felt like I wasn't the same athlete that I was during practice. And so there's been a lot of evolution since then, and a lot of changes in my mentality. And I think a lot of it truly just has been gained through experience competing. I think I learned the hard way in some ways. And then other ways too is, I've been so stressed before in competition that I've learned that it's just such a waste. It's such a waste of emotions and adrenaline, so you have to basically control that stress, control that adrenaline, and almost use it as a tool at the right moment when you need it, right before your match.
Is it?
Paris was your first Olympics?
Yes, my first Olympics.
How different is that experience, the energy, the stage, specifically in your sport? Is it just like completely at another level, or is it, just another international tournament?
So in some ways, it cannot compare to any other competition. But in other ways, it's just like any other competition, if that makes sense. So when it comes to, the people around the world watching, the impact it can have, the media, all of that, it's you can't compare it to anything else. But when it comes down to your competitors, the rule set, even the bracket, it's just a wrestling competition, the wrestling mat, referee. If anything, if things are run the best they possibly could be run, it's Olympics. There's going to be, almost no mistakes caught as far as reffing and things like that. Everything needs to be proper and set. Nobody's missing weight. Nobody's late. And I think for me, leading up to competition, one thing that a lot of the coaches stressed is don't think about it as anything other than another wrestling competition, because there have been athletes that have competed in the Olympics and they just let the idea of it get to their head. And you could see an athlete winning the world championships and then going to the Olympics and not even placing, because just that different mindset, letting the stress get to them. So for me, I think I had like an on and off switch. So when it came to the opening ceremonies, I was in the oh my gosh, this is the Olympics, like really taking it all in. And then as competition got closer, I'm like, okay, this is just another wrestling competition. It's the most important competition of my life, but it is still just a wrestling competition. I am in a bracket of 16. I need to win 4 matches to get gold. Just make it simple in my head. And then among those 4 matches, I don't need to worry about the next 3 until I win my first one. So it's kind of, thinking about the full picture, but then breaking it down and focusing on just what you need to at the moment. And so that's how it was for me. But then once you're finished, I mean, nothing can compare from my experience to the Olympics versus any other competition I've had. It was just the most amazing 2 weeks of my life. It was awesome.
That's awesome. Is it a lot of the same competitors? Like, is it kind of in your bracket, you're kind of like seeing a lot of the same competitors in different competitions? So that's similar too? Like you just kind of, it's the Olympics, but we're all here?
Well, it could be. So normally there's 10 weight classes. For the Olympics, there's only 6. And then there can only be 16 countries that qualify per weight. So starting the year before the Olympics, the qualification process starts. It's like the first 5 countries that medal at Worlds. And then after that, there's continental qualifiers. And then there's the last chance qualifier. So for me, actually, the weight class I went in, I had to cut down a weight. So it was just losing 4 kilos. But 68 kilos, which was my weight, was not qualified. So that whole year, it was a complicated process of having to wrestle off the previous representative at that weight, then going to Mexico to do the continental qualifier, qualifying 68, then going to the Olympic trials, doing a best 2 out of 3 matchup, and then finally making the Olympic team. And then obviously studying and preparing for the 15 other people in my division.
I heard you talk about this before. And I'm curious how you studied and prepared for these athletes. So, for those who are listening who didn't have a chance yet to go watch your final match, I think what was most impressive about the matches is that, correct me if I'm wrong, please, you only gave up 2 points total in the Olympics. Is that right?
Yeah, correct.
And I think you scored I want to say 30 something points. And so that's fascinating to me. In the final, which should be arguably the 2 top women of that. I mean, you just, you knew you were going to win. With how many minutes left did you know you were going to win? I'm thinking based on what I saw, with 2 minutes left, I thought you knew you were going to win. Was I tripping?
It's kind of this feeling, after about a minute with my opponent, that I can kind of feel whether or not they're dangerous in the sense of being at risk of getting taken down. And I personally felt like all 4 of my opponents in the Olympics, I felt like I had really great control. But at the same time, I've witnessed so many matches where somebody's winning and loses last minute. So that's why I don't let my guard down even for a second. And even when I think I'm going to win and I have 10 seconds left, I don't fully relax until that clock hits 0. So I might have felt confident, and I probably used that, to empower myself and feel good throughout the match. But I definitely didn't really realize it until the clock hit 0. And then, of course, when it did hit 0, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, wait, this is the Olympics? So then it's just realizing all that. Yeah.
With 4 different matches and looking at the way the brackets were set up, and a lot of stuff's outside your control. Obviously, who you're going to compete against, what times, all that kind of stuff. I'm curious, do you have a mantra or do you have a go-to before you step on those mats of something that you kind of level set yourself? You said you have an on and off switch, I think makes total sense. Especially for an Olympics where you have this opening ceremony, you might not compete for a week after that or whatever it might be. I'm curious, right before you get on the mat or right when you're on the mat, is there a mantra or a go-to, or how do you center yourself for a match? And is it always the same every single match?
It's not always the same. It depends how I'm feeling, but my goal is to maintain a balance. So if I'm feeling too calm, I hype myself up. I freak myself out. If I'm feeling too stressed, I decrease it. I'm like, all right, let's go out and have fun. Worst that's going to happen. You're going to mess up. You're going to learn from it, and you're going to get better. So I kind of just balance the thoughts, the emotions, the stress, so that I can walk out feeling what I personally feel like is the right combination of being sharp and focused, but also having a little bit of adrenaline. So it's different each time because I'm just trying to get that balance so that when I walk out there, my mind is clear and I'm focused and that I'm excited, ramped up, excited, all those things. Personally too, ever since I was little, I always felt like I performed and had more fun when there was a bigger crowd, more people watching. And I think that's why the Olympics was so fun for me, because when I competed in the World Championships, oftentimes when the women's finals were happening, the arena was relatively empty. Like you could just see like just a few seats that were full, which is a little disappointing, wrestling in the world finals. And then you see the men's matches and it's all packed. Whereas in the Olympics, I just walk out and I'm like, it's just crowds and crowds of people. And I got goosebumps. And then I was trying, okay, don't overhype yourself. But generally, I feel like that truly helped me perform my best. Just seeing all the people out there, whether they were cheering for me or somebody else, it just makes it all so exciting.
Mm. I think we mentioned this in the intro, but you're the youngest U.S. Olympic champion in wrestling history. You won your gold at 20 years old. One thing that we both put down here is wrestling's obviously a tough sport on the body. What is kind of the average, I guess, expectation of a lifespan of a wrestling athlete? And what are you doing as someone that's, very young in the sport? And I'm assuming you want to continue doing this for a very long time. What are you doing and thinking about now to try and extend that as much as possible with all the demands?
So I guess which the average lifespan you would call it. I think once you hit 30, it starts, a lot of wrestlers start to retire, sometimes 31, 32, 33. But actually, I believe, I don't know how old he was. There was a guy from Cuba that won, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Fourth or fifth Olympic gold medal, and he was like 40 something.
Yeah.
If you really want to learn the secrets for longevity, he's probably somebody to check out, because he doesn't normally compete in the World Championships. He just disappears for 4 years and then comes back, wins an Olympics, and then disappears again. But he officially retired at this Olympics. But he's so cool, and I don't think he gets the recognition he deserves. But
dude, I'm so glad you brought that up. I definitely want to get to your answer. But Gabe, we got to check this. I got to show you this guy. He came on the scene and Cuban wrestler. His name is
Lopez
Mijan Lopez Nunes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
41.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing. But yeah, so me personally, I think when I was a teenager, probably 14 to 17, I just had the mindset of training as hard as I possibly could. I wasn't really prioritizing recovery. I was prioritizing, diet and proper nutrition, things like that. But I would just work out 3 times a day. I wasn't doing anything to recover. And it caught up with me. I started to get injured. Whereas when I was younger, I kind of had this mindset of, oh yeah, nobody can injure me. I'm so tough. I'm so strong. It definitely caught up with me. One of my first major injuries that was really painful was a herniated disc that I had for about a year and a half to 2 years. And it just caused really painful sciatica. And it just impacted my quality of life, not even to mention wrestling, but just in general, having to sit down while traveling or doing schoolwork, anything like that. I would just stand all day long, got a standing desk, walk for hours, anything to relieve the pain. And then wrestling wise too, it kind of changed my style of wrestling. I had to be a lot more conservative and careful with the way I wrestled. Instead of trying to do all those funky, crazy moves, suplexes, things like that, I was a lot more careful with attacks and things like that. Eventually, actually, I did get minimally invasive back surgery because I tried all sorts of physical therapy, cortisone shot, different things, and it didn't get better. And I guess I was one of those people that it was successful, and I'm pretty much pain-free right now. I guess I probably have maybe 5% of what I used to have. But that was a wake-up call for me. And then after that, I really rethought everything, being a lot more careful with recovery. Training, not training so much, quality over quantity is the words I was looking for. Definitely, not trying to put in hours and hours, but making sure that the time that you do put in is worthwhile and everything is really thought out. You're not just running for hours for no reason when you don't even need to cut weight, more wrestling specific things that have a purpose behind them.
What are some of the things that you're doing now for recovery?
Well, I do a lot of sauna, a lot of ice bath. I take more rest days than usual. I have massage or soft tissue work sometimes when I'm able to. Do a lot of stretching. Stretching is really big for me, probably once or twice a day, depending on my workouts. Whenever I start a workout, I always have this mobility routine I go through. I've had the same strength coach since I was 10 years old. One of the most amazing, influential people in my life. And so that's his mobility routine that he would kind of put me through. Just like, it's almost called like a walkout, it's like just a series of stretches and stuff right before you get into any sort of lift or something like that. So either before I lift or run or wrestle, I'll usually get my stretch in. And so that helps me feel good. And then, of course, depending on how I feel, I'll work on extra things or more specific things.
If you don't mind, I mean, what is that? So it's pre and post you're doing something, and are you doing something different pre and post? So what is the pre to go to? What has it been since you were 10?
Yeah, so it's like a walkout. So, you start out standing up, touch your toes, walk out, seal stretch, cat stretch. I don't know the names of all these stretches, but I could definitely get a video to you guys if you want to see it. But it's basically all these stretches. You have some sit outs. You have what he calls like twisting bears that are like rotations. It stretches a lot of different things: lower back, shoulders, hips, knees, calves, ankles, wrists. A lot of stuff. And then also I'll do kind of like some movements. Like I'll walk like on the sides of my feet, roll my ankles out, do some shuffles, some high kicks, some what's it called? It's funny. I know all this stuff, but I just don't know the terms because I'm not.
It's cool. I'd love to connect with you offline and just see it. The only reason why I'm asking is selfishly, like, especially for a lot of the listeners to the podcast, we're older and we do a lot of jiu-jitsu. And because I'm old and I do a lot of jiu-jitsu, like if I could borrow one of your things that you do on the mats, that's great. Because I know for me, and Gabe and I have talked about this, like on the mats, I spend, like with my workouts, I'll like skimp on my warm up a little bit. With jiu-jitsu, I don't skimp ever. Like I always slowly roll into things because I just feel like you're in such different compromised positions that are outside of your control. So getting your body prepared for that, I think, is really important. So I'd love to connect with you and see what that is, because if it works for you and you've done pretty well, hopefully it'll work for me too.
Yeah,
Jason's getting old.
Yeah, I started doing jiu-jitsu when I was 11, I think. I went to a wrestling practice at a jiu-jitsu gym. I heard about it for a while, but I was very against the idea of submissions. But somehow the instructor convinced me to start. And then ever since then, I've just definitely loved it almost as much as wrestling. So it's another huge passion of mine. It's awesome that you guys do jiu-jitsu.
Do you see yourself getting into a place where you'd want to compete in jiu-jitsu? Because jiu-jitsu is blowing up. And I'm sure, I don't know if you know this, but there's a movie called Way of the Warrior Kid coming out with Jocko. It was a book that they wrote, and there's a movie coming out in the next however long. And I think you're going to see like a surge of jiu-jitsu with youth, kind of like what we saw with Karate Kid with like, this is before your time. But with Karate Kid, it got really popular. This is the first Karate Kid, not like whatever. But I'm curious, do you have a desire to get into jiu-jitsu from a competitive perspective, or are you obviously you're at the tip of the spear for wrestling. So how's that look?
Yeah, I did compete in jiu-jitsu a few times. I think it was like blue belt. And then I did like a GP in Brazil, actually during COVID. But then, when things got a little bit more serious with wrestling, actually had like a torn elbow through jiu-jitsu. So it wasn't an arm bar, but it was like a post, whatever. It was just some crazy thing. But then I just realized I really do need to put more focus into wrestling. And then when I do jiu-jitsu, I have to be very careful with, which partners I have, make sure nobody really like has like an ego or something, gonna get frustrated and be like a little bit too aggressive or dangerous. So that was what happened to me. So ever since then, I got a little bit scared to get back into it. Only when I am competing very competitively and I have a very important competition coming up. So because of that, I haven't been doing as much jiu-jitsu as I used to. I used to go like I would have like 2 jiu-jitsu practices a day and then a wrestling practice. So I absolutely love it. And I think it helped a lot with my scrambling skills and balance within wrestling, things like that. Just body awareness. Really love that I got into it that young. But as your question, as far as competing, probably I would love to compete. I don't know if you would say like professionally or really competitively, but definitely for fun. Maybe, I don't know how old I'm going to be, but when my wrestling kind of slows down a little bit more, I definitely think I'm going to be doing a lot of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. I see the sport just blowing up, especially for women too. I mean, you're seeing who's number one, the UFC Fight Pass, CJI. There's a lot, ADCC. There's a lot of opportunities, I think, for jiu-jitsu right now, which is exciting. And obviously, I think you're going to absolutely crush it. I did have a question for you. I heard you talking about this a little bit, and I think it's a really interesting concept about wanting to peak at the right time, and making sure that you're avoiding injury. So for me, I competed at the CrossFit Games for about a decade, and getting ready for the CrossFit Games, one of the things that was difficult is that you wanted to be strong, you wanted to be fit, you wanted to be all these things, but then if you got injured, you're not going to be able to compete. So I'd say like a month out, it kind of started getting in your head a little bit like, okay. And so especially like 2 weeks out, got into your head even a little bit more like, okay, is this even worth me doing a deadlift at this amount of weight or whatever it is? Because I'm not going to get that much stronger and I need to be healthy for this. But in wrestling, the struggle there is that there are so many factors that become outside your control. So how do you balance that mentally where you're prepping for an international competition, but you have this variable that your training partner that you can't control? How do you not be in your own head about getting injured while simultaneously trying to be the best? You know what I'm saying?
That's been a struggle for me, especially after all the injuries I've had. I've had years, actually, I think 2 consecutive years that I barely had any training before competition because I was just out. And then I was cleared on time and then was able to go compete. So definitely have learned the hard way. And then I think now, my mindset is probably shifted a little bit too much towards being careful rather than pushing myself. So I'm trying to have that balance and not get in my head. So I do think I'm still learning as far as that. But I definitely learn a lot too from the older women that are on my team, just seeing the way that they're able to listen to their body and just step aside and be like, you know what, today I'm pushing myself hard, today I'm not. But in general, I think, leading up to the Olympics, a lot of it was just putting my trust into the team of people around me, whether that was the national team coach, personal coach, advice from my strength trainer, things like that, and just taking their advice, but then at the same time trying to listen to my body and then also communicating how I'm feeling. Because I think with wrestling, a lot of times, we feel certain things and we just push it away because that's how we're taught to keep working hard, even when we're, we want to quit. We just push those thoughts away and keep going. So part of it is just being able to listen to that and just understand, okay, is this just because I'm tired and lazy? Or is this because I'm on the verge of getting injured and I didn't recover and I'm not in the right shape at this moment today to really push? So it's just trying to understand that. And then as far as training partners, that is, you have to be careful with who you train with. I find partners that you are comfortable with training with, maybe having certain partners that are more for right before competition when it's really vital that you don't get injured. And then when you're further out, going with more of a variety of different people, because I do think that getting those different feels is really good too.
I mean, I saw something you posted on social media, really interesting take. Something else we talk a lot about on the podcast is social media and how it can be a double-edged sword. And I thought you had a really, really interesting take on, it not necessarily being a distraction, at least for you. I see you're super active on social media, and you mentioned that you were actually posting more and more active, like in the weeks leading up to the Olympics, when a lot of people might argue like, hey, head in the game, this thing's a distraction, don't do it. I'm super curious, especially as someone that, is young and has grown up with these this technology, these platforms pretty much probably as long as you remember. How have you found that balance and that, positive mentality with social media when, a lot of people would argue that, it can become maybe a toxic place, a distracting place. How have you gotten there and what's kind of the advice?
It's varied a lot from person to person. I think specifically within wrestling, almost all of my teammates, you'll see that they're barely on social media at all right before competition. And a lot of people are going to recommend, staying off social media and things like that. So I really do think it's a personal decision and it depends on how you think social media impacts you. Me personally, when I'm on there, I'm truly just looking at the positive side of things. I'm not going to go down the wrong path of scrolling over negative or mindless things. I'm always there with a purpose, this is like an interesting fact, or this is useful, this is helpful, maybe wrestling technique or something like that. Or maybe it's just calming my nerves. Maybe it's a distraction in a good way, like watching videos of cute dogs. Or me personally, I'm a huge foodie, so I'll just be watching like, oh my gosh, look at this amazing dish or this amazing pastry being made, especially in France too. There were some really famous bakeries there that I had on my list to go to after competition. So, but actually it's been quite a journey for me because I remember when I was really starting to get more competitive in wrestling, I was winning some big national competitions, things like that. My family was like, oh, Amit, you got to start a YouTube channel. You're doing so many cool things. You got to put this out there. And I was always very stubborn. I was, no, I'm never doing this. I don't like I don't like that picture. I don't like what you said. I don't like how you made me look, all these different things. Very introverted in general. And just somehow, slowly, I remember when I first started posting, it was after practice. I was probably 15, if I'm remembering correctly. And I just remember my coach saying, Amit, I've been bothering you about this for months. You just took a photo with this famous wrestler. You are posting this right now at this moment. I'm like, okay, fine. Like I couldn't say no to him. First post. And then slowly I built my confidence and I became more comfortable with the idea of putting myself out there. And it's been years, but it's kind of changed into something that's really fun where I feel like I've just built, like there's a community of people and I feel like just really being my true authentic self. It not only just feels good to put that out there, I feel like I'm making an impact on other female wrestlers, on the wrestling community, maybe people outside of that too. And it's just fun in general. I feel like it adds and it's definitely not a distraction. And specifically in the Olympics too, right before competition, a lot of times there's just so much waiting to be done because you've already done all the preparation. And I think that's when a lot of athletes can get really stressed because they're just sitting around. They're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? What do I do? And they're just like, oh, let me just compete already. So for me, I was like, oh, okay, I have this like funny post idea or let me edit this or something like that. So it helped me. It was something, a little bit less stressful, something silly on the side that I could put some energy into.
Do you see social, like from a wrestling and Olympian perspective, like one of the things that I think I struggle with watching I don't struggle with this, but it's hard for me because I think the Olympians should be compensated extremely well. And I think that what they've accomplished is a tremendous feat. But correct me if I'm wrong, but like, what do you win? So if you win gold medal at the Olympics, what do you win? Aside from, a ton of pride and a medal. I'm talking purely financially.
Yeah. It used to be not that much for wrestling. And actually a lot of wrestlers were leaving the sport, obviously, for other things like fighting. And I think, I don't know how recent it is, but a couple years back, they started something called the Living the Dream Medal Fund. So it's probably nothing compared to what you get in some other sports, but it's pretty amazing for wrestling. So what it is there's quite a few donors that a lot of these people also donate to USA Wrestling in general, just to help fund travel for athletes. But they also donate to this fund. And what it is it's like, depending on which medal you win, whether it's Olympic gold or world gold, silver, bronze, you receive a certain amount of money. It's specifically for Olympic gold. It's $250,000, which is tax-free, which is pretty amazing. So that's been pretty life-changing.
And that just started recently.
I
could look it up, but
recently in the wrestling sense. But for me, probably, I don't know, like eight years ago, maybe.
Wow.
But it's pretty life-changing, and then it helps a lot of us. Obviously, it's only the people at the very top, unfortunately. You know, if you are struggling and dreaming big, but you don't get that gold medal or even that silver or bronze, you know, that it makes a huge difference. So, but yeah, it's I'm pretty much, you know, set for a lot of the fees and things like that for the next 4 years. So it's going to help me tremendously with LA coming up.
Wow. That's really cool.
Yeah, incredible. And obviously, you know, very, very well deserved. But like you pointed it out, it's the unfortunate part is that it's going to be very few and at the top. And I think one thing that, you know, a lot of people don't realize, I was listening to this on a podcast. I forget what podcast is. People don't realize that, you know, a lot of the travel and all of the expenses, unless you have, you know, like, you know, donors and these organizations, like a lot of athletes that are at a very high level, but just not quite there, like not podium athletes, like not only are they not getting paid, all those expenses they're covering themselves.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, no, that's correct. Yeah. And it's difficult. It takes a really special person to be able to just, you know, it's almost like, you know, gambling on yourself pretty much, you know, trusting in yourself that the investment and the difficulties are going to be worth it in the long run.
So do you think social media plays a role there? That's the reason why I was kind of bringing this up, I guess, is that first off, I had no idea about this fund, and I think it's absolutely incredible. At the same time, it's $250,000 for the Olympics, which is a 4-year commitment, and you have to be a top contender, right? So how about for the people who are in, and this same thing, by the way, goes along with many of additional sports. Speaking about CrossFit, there's multiple opportunities throughout the year now to make hundreds of thousands of dollars, which I think is good, but not many athletes are making their full-time living off of prize purses. Most of them are making it off social media. So what I'm curious about, do you see that as a vision for the sport of wrestling, or, you know, what role does social play in terms of financially? I think you spoke very well about, you know, kind of how you look at it, but I'm wondering if other wrestlers look at it in terms of a way to generate revenue for the future.
I think, unfortunately, in wrestling, it's not that common that people are using wrestling and social media financially, you know, to help financially. For an example, I was really fangirling over women's rugby during the Olympics, and I just love the way social media made women's rugby explode, you know, especially with Ilona Maher. And I kind of hope that our women's wrestling team, you know, wrestling in general, I hope that these wrestling athletes get more into social media, because wrestling is so cool. And if this stuff is put out there, you know, and people start posting more, they get more comfortable, especially, you know, the top athletes, the ones that are really big inspirations. If they start posting more, if they become a little bit more like influencers, if, of course, the most important thing is their performance and preparation for competition. But if they do start to like social media and we kind of all get into it, I think it can truly help grow our sport. So I'm always, whenever I'm at the training center or something, I'm always pushing people into my videos or telling them to post things about themselves. So I'm trying.
Yeah, that's admirable. Yeah. And I think I love that. By the way, the rugby player, man, I specifically remember this clip. She's just like running people over, and she was beautiful and elegant. I mean, it was incredible. So that's a great example that you're talking about, Amit.
Yeah, it really, it's so funny because it like completely put the sport on the map. I mean, obviously she blew up, but like the whole sport has benefited. I feel like, you know, she's gotten to a point where like everything she's almost involved in, like just kind of gets eyeballs on it. And all that's going to do, I mean, going back to Jay, something you've always talked about in the fitness industry, you're like rising tide lifts all boats. Like everyone benefits from people being more involved. I do think that, and again, like there isn't even a question here. It's just, you know, a difficult thing, because I do think that it's a slippery slope. Because I start thinking about like the new rules with college athletes and how they can now get paid and benefit from like building their own brand. And you've seen this already with some of the players coming up now. It almost like then the personal brand starts like being first over like the actual sport and the team and the love for it. So I don't know. It's going to be a fine balance because to your point, I think there's so much benefit to just getting eyeballs on whether it's your college program, whether it's you as a personal brand, your sport. But then at what point then do the incentives become just being like a flashy, like really interesting person on social media versus like the sport and being dominant? So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, but that's always something that I think about from, the podcast episode we had with the basketball player. I think that he brought it up, perfectly.
Yeah. And NIL, it was NIL? Is it? No. Mm-hmm. Yeah. NIL. Right? That's the fund, or is it? Anyways, it's the fund that basically, Amit, are you familiar with this? Is there money that comes? Yes.
I made the decision.
Name, image, likeness.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, correct.
So are you familiar with that? And has that been something that's came up in your life at all?
A little bit here and there. I know specifically for the Olympics, there was a certain time period. I don't remember what term they used for it, but we weren't allowed to post about any of our sponsors at all during that time period. And they weren't allowed to post about us directly. Like they could post a picture of us, but they couldn't put our name there. So it was interesting. It was during this Olympics. Personally, it didn't really impact because I wasn't really posting that much about sponsors or anything like that. As far as NIL, I'm not wrestling for a college team. I take classes online, so I'm not sure how it goes for the girls that are, for example, wrestling for Iowa. Iowa women's wrestling has like skyrocketed. The majority of like a lot of the top girls are now wrestling for Iowa, and I think the collegiate championships are actually happening this weekend, which is exciting.
That's awesome.
I've never understood, and maybe you can just explain it super high level. Why is it exactly that like you can't do both? Go the college route and the Olympic route? Is it technically because you're a professional at the Olympic level and you can't be a professional and compete for school?
No, you can absolutely do both. It was a personal decision.
Oh, okay, got it.
Not to wrestle for a college team, but rather just put all my focus into training for international competitions. But for example, the girl in the weight class above me I think she's just started wrestling for Iowa this year, but she won an Olympic silver medal. And you can absolutely go to nationals, things like that, win, qualify, compete at Worlds, compete at the Olympics. I mean, it might be different for other sports, maybe like gymnastics, I heard, but for wrestling, you can totally do both.
Yeah, I think for gymnastics, maybe I'm just getting them confused. But okay, that makes sense. But yeah, it also makes sense like picking your focus because obviously there's a lot that goes into going to school and being a student athlete versus like, hey, international, this is where I'm going to put, my focus on. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, we really appreciate, you coming on the show and talking through a lot of these things. I think that it's really remarkable. It's remarkable how dominant you are. And anytime that we talk to someone who's that, I mean, it's rare that we come across many people like you. And I think it's awesome because you're not just winning, you're like dominant. And I think it's badass. I guess like a final thing I'd ask you is like, one big takeaway that I'd love to learn is like, what do you think, and we talked a little bit about this, but like if there was one thing that you could say that your parents or your family instilled in you, one thing they did that you think kind of like, aside from like your mom giving you the power, that's a huge takeaway for me, but is there something else do you think your family cultivated to allow you to be so successful at your sport? Because I want to be able to try and do that with my kids.
I think it's the mentality that no matter what you pursue, you always give and do your very best. You never ever, I'm sorry, I'm going to use the words, you never ever half-ass anything. You always give 100%, no matter what it is. And then also to listen to your heart. I mean, wrestling was probably not my mom's first choice as to a sport for her daughter to do. I remember her saying, "Oh, come on, let's do tennis," or "Don't you want to try ice skating," or something. But she was supportive of me no matter what, and supportive of my siblings no matter what, as long as we do our very best. And it's kind of, I guess, this just drive from within that I felt personally. And anything I ever done, you just just to make sure you do your very best. And then, of course, having passion does help. If you're forced to do something that you don't like, you're studying a topic you don't like in school, for example, for me, it was history. It's a lot harder to do your very best in something you don't like and something you don't have passion in. But I think that combination of being driven and having passion for something and having that mentality, I think it is truly amazing.
Mm.
Amit, one last question for me, and I'm curious if you've given this any thought, but any goals beyond wrestling? Like, have you thought about like eventually wanting to coach or just even anything else? And where's your head at?
Probably my nearest goal is to stay healthy and strong and make it to the LA 2028 Olympics. In the long run, I absolutely want to help coach wrestling, help women's wrestling, help wrestling in general. I don't know if that's what I would be doing full time. And I do have a lot of other interests in just sports in general. Like I said, growing up, I just played all sorts of different things. Jiu Jitsu is definitely one of them. I did some Muay Thai for a little bit. I just love trying different things in general. I actually have a lot of admiration for CrossFit in general. I always watch those videos and how athletic you guys are.
You'd be legit at it. You'd be super good at it. If you ever want to get into it, give us a call, because you'd have to learn some skills, but no one would get close to you on the mindset.
Yeah.
Sorry, go.
It looks so fun. And I think, just the challenge and how hard it looks. Pretty awesome. I love watching those videos, Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Amit, if people want to go, is the best place for them to go, your YouTube, your Instagram? Where should they go? We could put in the podcast show notes as well to keep up on your journey.
My Instagram would probably be the best. That's Amit Elor 1.
Okay. So we'll put that in the podcast show notes. And final little thing, Gabe and I, we hope nothing more. We Gabe, when you go to LA Olympics, Gabe and I are going to be fired up to come and watch and support you, because I definitely want to go to the Olympics with my kids. I think it's a really cool thing. They're going to be in California. Obviously, I live in California, and I would love to cheer on someone that I feel connected to. So super excited for you to go down there and just absolutely dominate like you did in Paris, and really appreciate you taking the time today. It means a lot. For everyone who's been listening, if you've taken out of this, I know I have, some nuggets, right? Simple ask, as we always do. Share the podcast with 3 friends and leave a rating review. Definitely helps with the show, but more important than anything, it just spreads the word, tries to elevate everybody else around us. So I hope you and your families are doing well. Thank you so much, Amit, and everybody, keep training hard.